Eric Gordon is certainly in the back half of his NBA career, but is he going to be winding that down in Houston, or is he going to be on the move this summer?
You are Locked On Hoosiers, your daily podcast on the Indiana Hoosiers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, guys? It is Wednesday, June 15th. This is a Locked On Hoosiers, your daily one-stop shop for everything IU athletics. I'm your host, as always, Jacob Rude. Want to thank you guys for making Locked On Hoosiers your first listen every single day. Feels like it's been a while, certainly well over a decade, since Eric Gordon has been a Hoosier. He's played out a pretty interesting NBA career with the latter half of that in Houston. And now as he enters kind of the final years of his career, it's going to be interesting to see if he is going to see it out as kind of a veteran leader in Houston, or moving on to a contending team where he may be able to help and get a ring at the end of his career. Those were questions I had for Locked On Rockets host Jackson Gatlin. We recorded a conversation last week talking about Eric Gordon, his career, everything of that note. So without further ado, let's throw it to that conversation. And as promised, I am now here with Locked On Rockets host Jackson Gatlin. Jackson, man, appreciate you coming on. We were kind of talking about it before we started, but how much fun is it? What's it like just having Eric Gordon in Houston now for so long?
So fun story here, and we're going to use the word fun a lot, I feel like, in this podcast, because Eric Gordon, one, is just he's a total fan favorite here in Houston. Everybody loves him. But one of the best things about EG and his time here in Houston, and I don't know if this started back during his college days, I don't know if he developed this as an NBA player, but he is one of the most animated guys in the NBA when it comes to reacting to foul calls and just reacting in general, over the course of a game. And he has given us so many beautiful, just still captions, GIF reactions and stuff over the years, to where Rockets fans have started accumulating these. And I remember there was this one time he reacted to a foul call a couple seasons back, and it's incredible because his face is just what, freaking out. And the part that really sold it is I pulled the screenshot, and at the same time, there was an ad in the bottom right corner for a Wendy's Baconator or something. And so it's just the entire ensemble of that little moment is incredible. And Rockets fans everywhere have folders upon folders of these EG reaction memes just saved. There are people who throw them into little compilations and do little collages of them. It's truly a treat. And so that's just one little facet of what makes EG such an amazing player that fans just love to cheer for, love to root for. And I mean, his time in Houston, he's if you look at his time spent in Houston, there's probably an argument that he's a top 20 all-time Rocket, legitimately.
Wow, it's awesome to see him kind of establish those roots. I don't remember there being that many reaction GIFs. Well, GIFs definitely weren't even around when he was at IU, but I don't remember that being a big part. It might be just that we have GIFs and so much stuff like that now for people to capture it. But it's been fun to watch him kind of establish himself in Houston. If we look back at last season specifically, the Rockets have kind of shifted to a more of a rebuilding type of philosophy, I guess, after competing for so long. But Eric Gordon's been one of the few holdovers during that time. I guess, what was his role this past season, and I guess how did he perform overall for you guys?
Well, EG, first off, has been an absolute professional throughout this kind of transition from what was the competitive James Harden era to, the Rockets are, the NBA life cycle. It's, that, sometimes you're at the top, then you're working your way towards the top, and sometimes you're at the bottom. And right now the Rockets find themselves at the bottom in the post James Harden era. But EG has been awesome through this entire experience. He's really kind of taken on more of a leadership role than he's ever had to do before in his career. He's had to be more vocal. He's taken on, kind of taken on all these young guys under his wing, teaching them how to be professionals, teaching them the do's, the don'ts, like all this stuff. And the impression, especially from this last season, around the team, around people who cover the team, is that EG is content with this role. Like he's happy. He is bought into the idea of, kind of stewarding these young guys as the Rockets are navigating the early stages of this rebuild. He's incredibly happy here in Houston. He's either just built, about to build, or just did build a brand new house here in Houston. So, you talk about establishing roots. He is very happy to be here. The Rockets are happy to have him as part of this organization. And when you talk about a veteran presence like Eric Gordon, he is almost the perfect, most ideal vet to have around a young core like what the Rockets have right now, because he impacts the game at a high level on both ends. And when you look at what he does offensively, he doesn't need the basketball to impact the game on that side of the floor, right? He's such an elite, lethal shooter, and he's got such ridiculous range that he just parks himself behind the 3-point line. And it's kind of, I joked a lot last season that there were possessions where EG would just be like, all right, guys, I'm here on the 3-point line if you need me. And they'd start running their sets. KPJ would run a pick and roll. Jalen Green would get in the action, and, maybe something wouldn't work out. So they've got like less than 10 seconds on the shot clock. So it's just like, okay, what do we do? Eric, get over here. It's your turn. And he's like, all right. And he steps in, you give him the basketball, and he just bully balls his way into the paint for two. So he is truly like the perfect veteran to complement these young guys, to kind of be there to help guide them as they're establishing themselves as NBA players.
It seemed, this might just be me, but it seemed like the switch from being kind of this contributor to like the old guy on the team just happened so fast that I didn't even really realize it until kind of early on in the season when I was looking at how he was doing and looking at the roster, and I realized, oh, he's like the oldest guy on this roster this season. And it just came out of nowhere because it seemed like he was and the Rockets were just in the middle of this competing, and he was just one of those guys. So it's awesome to see and hear that he's kind of embracing that role and excelling in that role. And I want to just talk about his time in Houston as a whole, and as we've said, kind of making roots in Houston and the success he's had there here in just a moment. Before we continue talking about Eric Gordon, I want to tell you guys about the latest thing Built Bar has to offer. You know how our friends at Built are always coming out with amazing new flavors. Well, this time Built has truly outdone themselves with their mud pie flavor. Nothing says summer like some mud pies. For the first time ever, Built is introducing the new mud pie flavor in both Built Bar and in Puffs. If you're not sure what mud pie tastes like, it's probably a little bit different than when you were a kid. If you're a chocolate fan, you better sit down for this. This new mud pie bar is rich whipped cream and chocolate mousse smothered in 100% real chocolate, topped with cookies and cream crumble. Sounds absolutely amazing. My mouth is watering as is. You got to try mud pie as soon as possible, and you need to hurry because the mud pie bar and mud pie puff are only available for a limited time. Visit built.com to taste the deliciousness for yourself. Not convinced? Luckily, we saved the best for last. It's actually good for you. Really, all Built Bar products are high in protein, low in sugar, low in calories. Mud pie is packed with 16 grams of protein, only 150 calories, and 8 grams of sugar. It's like your mom baked the most deliciously creamy, chocolatey mud pie and wrapped it up just for you. Like all Built Bars, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. You're going to love the new Mud Pie Built Bar and Built Puff. Whether you need a snack for your workout, a late night treat, or you just need to grab a quick bite, Built is the perfect protein bar, and they taste better than a candy bar. Go to Built.com right now. Add that to your cart. Use the promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. The Ultimate NBA Mock Draft starts June 16th. With over 50 insiders, nothing equals the Ultimate NBA Mock Draft. The Locked On NBA Big Board draft experts plus the Odyssey insiders all pitch in on this one. First pick is June 16th. Search Ultimate NBA Mock Draft and follow now so you do not miss a pick. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Hoosiers your first listen every day. Now let's throw it back to this conversation with Jackson to talk about how Eric Gordon has kind of established himself in Houston. So Eric Gordon came to Houston for the 2016-17 season. He had I guess, kind of a rocky career, one that was kind of marred by injuries. And now, as you said, and a little bit surprising as someone who isn't a Rockets fan, he's potentially a top 20 Rocket ever. I guess when you just look at kind of the totality of his time with the franchise, I guess what's just been the experience overall with him?
Well, I think, if we go all the way back to when the Rockets first signed him, right? This was a completely transformational offseason for the Houston Rockets. They brought in Mike D'Antoni to be the new head coach. They were coming off of a very disappointing 2015-2016 season in which they had high hopes, high aspirations to, replicate the success of the previous season where they made it to the Western Conference Finals for the very first time to face the Golden State Warriors. They got ousted in 5 games. That was the James Harden, Dwight Howard era Houston Rockets. And then, they completely just melted down the following season. So this was a new look Houston Rockets, no more Dwight Howard. And in that offseason, right, that was the offseason KD signed with the Golden State Warriors. So the power dynamics completely shifted in the NBA. And the Rockets had a ton of money to play around with because that was the summer that the NBA salary cap jumped up incredibly high. So they signed Ryan Anderson and Eric Gordon. And at the time, the reception was a little lukewarm, honestly, because Ryan Anderson, while he had some success in Orlando alongside Dwight Howard previously, and as just kind of a general stretch 4, it was kind of like, okay, what are we doing here? And then Eric Gordon, like you alluded to, right, had struggled with some injury, history, the consistency, all of that, not to say that there wasn't flashes of the talent there, but the health was a major concern. Came into Houston and immediately bought into the vision and the role for the team. That's why he won Sixth Man of the Year that year. So if you'll remember, at that time, James Harden starting 2 guard, Patrick Beverley was the Rockets starting point guard, and they brought Eric Gordon off the bench. And Mike D'Antoni presented that idea to him. He was like, "Hey, I want to bring you off the bench." And EG was like, "All right, I guess we'll do it." And that's what really made that team so potent offensively. And that's why that team at the time, back in 2016, 2017, was the most potent offense in NBA history at that point, with James Harden at the helm, creating for his teammates, all of that. So EG bought into that role early on, and he had a lot of success that very first year, won Sixth Man of the Year, and was by and large, the Rockets' second best player on that team. On any given night, it was either Eric Gordon or Ryan Anderson as the Rockets' second best player for that James Harden-led squad. And then that next year was the year where it really all kind of coalesced, right? They picked up Chris Paul. Eric Gordon was still in his 6th-man role coming off the bench. You have a gigantic, 3-headed dragon in James Harden, Chris Paul, and Eric Gordon at the guard spots. And that team won a franchise best 65 games. They went to the Western Conference Finals. They took the Golden State Warriors to 7 games despite missing Chris Paul for games 6 and 7. And Eric Gordon was a huge part of that. He, throughout his entire NBA career, throughout his entire Rockets career, I should say, has been the type of guy that steps up in those big moments. That's been a huge playoff contributor and performer. In the back-to-back years where the Rockets completely decimated the Utah Jazz in the playoffs, Eric Gordon absolutely locked down Donovan Mitchell. That's been the coolest part about EG as a Rocket, is he's not just this borderline all-star level player on offense. He brings you maybe not quite all NBA caliber defense, but for his size and for his position, he can guard multiple different players at multiple different positions and do it so effectively. And it's kind of funny, even now that he's, the old man of the squad, there are sometimes some possessions where the Rockets will be defending and they're EG will get switched onto a big or something. And you'll see the little baby Rockets and do we go help? What do we do? Do we double? And EG just waves them off go away. I've got this. And then he'll get he'll completely shut down a legitimate 6'8", 6'10" post player just because he's so stocky and big for his position that they can't budge him off the block. And so it's just the funniest little thing to see they don't quite know what's going on yet. And EG's just like, I know what I'm doing. Leave me alone.
Just one of those moments where he has to remind all the young guys that he still has it, even on the defensive end of the court. I
Absolutely.
I always found it fascinating just looking at him statistically. Before he gets to Houston, he averaged a little under 5 3-pointers per game. Comes to Houston, and then it's almost 9 3-pointers a game under Mike D'Antoni. How much did that system kind of just fit into the skill set he had and help him have that strong run that included that six-man award?
Well, I think Mike D'Antoni's system at its core, definitely helps, get the most out of really any player on the roster, especially role players. That's why you see sometimes guys have their, best, best years of their career under a Mike D'Antoni led system, because it allows you those types of opportunities to to cater and play towards your strengths. And that Rockets team, especially the very first version of it in 2016, 2017 under MDA, that was the team that like lived and died by the three every single game. They took 0 mid-range shots. It wasn't until the following season when they introduced Chris Paul that they finally had that kind of like that safety net, that safety valve of like, okay, the threes aren't falling. Where are we going to get our points from? Okay, Chris Paul can operate out of the mid-range and kind of, coax us along a little bit until the three ball starts falling again. So for EG to have the type of system that they had, where not only did they just prioritize the three, they prioritized deep threes, Jacob. Like this was, I mean, in Rockets practice, and this is more commonplace now in today's NBA, now that we're in 2022, but 5 years ago, this was not a commonplace occurrence. In Rockets practice, they would put a piece of blue tape well behind, kind of like if you're on the basketball court, where envision where like the coach's box is and how you have the first little hash mark of the coach's box, the one that's closer to the 3-point line. They basically would put some tape on the floor around that distance, so a good like 4 to 5 feet sometimes behind the 3-point line. And that's where guys like EG and Ryan Anderson would spot up on the wings, on the perimeter for their 3-point shots, because the entire philosophy was to stretch the defense as far out as possible to open up these driving lanes for James Harden and for everybody else on the team. And for EG and subsequently Ryan Anderson, for those two guys to be able to consistently, at the volume that they were shooting at and to shoot the percentages that they were shooting from that deep, was so utterly impressive. And that's a big reason why that Rockets team had so much success. A lot of the pundits before that season started had the Oklahoma City Thunder rated as a better team going into the season than the Houston Rockets. People thought the Rockets were going to be like a bottom, 7, 8 seed in the West that year, and they wound up finishing 3rd overall because of the production from guys like EG.
It was a fascinating time for the Rockets, for the NBA, to see them lean all the way into this just three-pointers are at the rim, as you were saying, no mid-range shots, and EG was such a huge part of that. His range has always been there, even dating back to high school. I watched him in high school knock down shots from near half court, so that's always been a part of his game. And that's if anybody needed a 4-point line, it might have been those Rockets teams, because they were bombing away with EG as one of those guys. I want to talk about his future and whether that's going to be in Houston now, if he's going to stay in kind of that veteran mentor role, or if he's going to move on to a competitor potentially here in a moment. So as much as EG might enjoy being the veteran mentor, it didn't stop him from being in trade rumors last season, and probably one of the biggest ones being with the Lakers and Russell Westbrook, with John Wall and Eric Gordon potentially. But he was rumored all around. I mean, there's still value for a guy that can knock down 3-pointers. He hit 41% of them last season. So I guess, what is the expectation for him? He's going into, technically has 2 years left on his deal, but I believe the second year is non-guaranteed. So I guess, what's just kind of the sense of what his future is, and if they're going to look to move him at all this offseason?
Yeah, so while the Rockets organization isn't necessarily in a position where they are, actively, desperately trying to unload Eric Gordon, because again, they are happy with the role that he's taken on to kind of help guide these young guys. If a team comes along with a solid enough offer for EG, the Rockets would be fools to not at least like entertain the offer and to, explore the possibility of moving him, because at the end of the day, having a vet like EG around is great. And I think it was really important this first year for a lot of the rookies that they brought in, for guys like Jalen Green, Alperen Şengün, Josh Christopher. Like, they brought in so many young guys. They had the holdovers from the couple, the few young guys that they had last season. Kevin Porter Jr. still trying to, establish himself as an NBA player, all of this. And the way the timeline kind of worked out for the Rockets is so interesting, because in that 2020-2021 season, which was the season where 9 games in, they traded James Harden. And that was kind of, we don't really view that as the ground floor first year of the rebuild, because that was kind of the transitional year. They didn't know whether James Harden was going to stick around or not. And that was basically being stuck in limbo for the rest of that season. Then they finished with the worst record. They picked up Jalen Green that offseason. This past season was the first year truly of the rebuild. And Eric Gordon was having one of the best seasons of his career. He was, healthy. He looked good. He was, the numbers were insanely good. And then he injured himself it was either right before or right after the All-Star break. You'll apologize for not knowing all my facts completely straight off the top of my head. But he was playing against the Sacramento Kings, and he actually had a groin injury, unfortunately. And this was just like 2 or 3 weeks before the trade deadline. And there was a ton of speculation that the Rockets were going to do their best to move on from Eric Gordon that season at the trade deadline. But because he had the groin injury, he wasn't like an asset anymore at that point, even though he was having an incredible season up to that point. So this past year, he was able to be healthy all season long. He sat out some games due to some, groin tightness, whatever, here and there, but mostly just maintenance stuff, no major injuries anywhere. And like you said, right, the numbers jumped off the page this season. He had a really impressive year, and he's the type of guy that you could add him to any team seeking a championship, and he's going to become an immediate difference maker. A lot of people pointed towards the Phoenix Suns and the fact that, at times it felt like they didn't have an adequate level of offensive production just between Chris Paul and Devin Booker, that they maybe needed another ball handler, another playmaker. And Eric Gordon could have been that guy. Now, the thing is, the Rockets this past year, up until the trade deadline, were very adamant about the fact that they didn't want to bring back a first-round draft pick that was for this NBA draft. They wanted future draft capital. And so that kind of tells you what the market was for Eric Gordon. There were teams that were willing to offer first-round draft picks to trade for Eric Gordon, but nothing in the realm of a future first-round draft pick past this current NBA draft. And so while I don't think Eric Gordon is being like shopped per se by the Houston Rockets, if there's a team out there that feels that they can, utilize his services and is willing to, give away an asset that is, a bit further down the pipeline rather than an immediate turnaround, like, all right, it's this draft or nothing, I think the Rockets would absolutely entertain that. Because like you said, he's basically an expiring contract this season, because he has another year on his deal, but the clause in his contract is that year does not become guaranteed unless his team wins the NBA championship. So at that point, if a team trades for him and they win the title and they lock in another year of EG, like, I feel like most teams would be okay with that. So that's one of those clauses where you're like, look, if it pays off, like, we're totally okay being, locked into another year Eric Gordon, because we just won the title. So the Rockets aren't in that position. So he is effectively on a 1-year deal right now if you're the Houston Rockets. So, and then any team that gets him, it is effectively a 1-year rental unless you win the title, which is almost like a perfect position to be in if you're looking to trade for a guy of his caliber.
I did not know that was the clause that guaranteed
it's a fun little wrinkle.
I think Al Horford had something somewhat similar this year, I believe, but that is awesome. And like you said, anybody that trades for him, if they win the title, they'll happily take another season of Eric Gordon, because that also probably meant he was a contributor for them. And you kind of touched on it. I mean, is he still capable, you think, of being a contributor on a title-winning team?
Absolutely, without a doubt. Like, his skill set is one that is going to continue to age pretty well at the NBA level. He's a guy that I think has, definitely like 3 or 4 more probably really solid years in him before we start to see like a significant drop off, because while he does rely on, a first step, the ability to drive to the basket a little bit, he's much more of like a physical player than he is like, an explosive athletic player. That's not to say that EG hasn't had some impressive displays of athleticism, because the fact that he's only, he stands at a towering 6'4", like when EG dunks, it's kind of surprising. It's like he gets shot out of a cannon to go up and dunk. And so it's always like, oh my God, Eric just dunked. but that's not his game. Like, he doesn't rely heavily and exclusively on the athleticism part of his game. He has gotten to this point where when he drives, like, he drives in, he's got this strong upper body. He just bullies past guys and knocks them off. And he's smart about stopping right at the rim and pump faking. And so I don't think he's a guy that, as he ages, is going to lose what makes him such a great player. There might be some slippage defensively as he ages and maybe loses some of that lateral quickness, the mobility on that side of the floor, possibly. But even this past season, we haven't seen much regression. There were times where maybe he wasn't, as invested, just because Rockets were the worst team in the NBA. And so he's not going to give 110% at all times on a losing team. But there were moments where, when he's locked in, when he wants to be competitive, when the games are actually close and the Rockets aren't getting blown out by like 20, where he's still the same old Eric Gordon that he's been for the last few years here in Houston. So he absolutely can contribute to a championship caliber team, and whether that's as a starter, whether that's as like a spark plug off the bench, which is probably his better role at this point in his career, either one, like any team would be lucky to bring him on.
I would love to see him make an NBA Finals, compete for a title, but it sounds like, excuse me, it sounds like he is just as comfortable being that veteran for the Rockets. So it's hard to complain if if he's in a role he likes. I appreciate you coming on. Let the people know where they can find your work at.
Absolutely. Well, shout out to our amazing Locked On network here. These crossovers are so fun, so unique. You can't really find this type of stuff, at other networks, but you can track me down. If you want to check out the Houston Rockets, if you want to find out what's going on with the rebuild, I do Locked On Rockets 5 days a week. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays to get your week started off right. 3 biggest stories from around the NBA every single Monday. And you can track me down on Twitter at JT Gatlin for all of my Houston Rockets and NBA musings.
Yeah, this has been one of my favorite parts about the Locked On Network, is that I could go to the different teams that have IU players on them and get just a firsthand kind of feel for how those excuse me, how those guys are playing. Again, thank you a ton for coming on, and really appreciate it. And best of luck to the Rockets, and I hope Eric Gordon is a part of the future there and the success you guys will have.
Absolutely, Jacob. Thanks for having me on.
Once again, big thanks to Jackson for coming on, having this conversation. I really enjoyed being able to go to the various experts and talking to them about the specific IU players in general. Apologies into that conversation. I was sick last week. I was trying to tough it out. It got to me at the end of it. I apologize for that horrible ASMR. I also, Monday's pod, I know it had some popping, some cracking in it. I got a new cord. I think that's taken care of for this podcast. If it's not, I'm working on it. I'm aware of it. I apologize for you guys. I also want to thank you guys real quick at the end of this show. I think I mentioned it before. We were named Podcast of the Week this week for Locked On. I can't thank you guys enough. We've still been doing this for less than a year, and the fact that we were named Podcast of the Week for the entire Locked On network is amazing. It's all to you guys. It's all credit to you guys for tuning in, for listening, for supporting the show. So on that note, if you guys can subscribe to the show, leave a rating and review, tell a friend about it. Anything you can to help us continue to grow is greatly, greatly appreciated. But thanks again for making Locked On Hoosiers your first listen every day. We'll be back with you on Friday. We're going to take a look at the Big Ten as a whole for men's basketball, where IU slots into that, if they are the favorites. So it should be a fun conversation. Now make your second listen the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast. Rafael Barlow, Richard Stamen, Sam Ferris, and Leif Thulin give fans an in-depth look into the biggest prospects, the latest player rankings, and of course, big boards. Follow Locked On NBA Big Board every day in the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get podcasts. Again, follow us on Twitter. Subscribe if you haven't already. Leave that quick rating and review. Follow us on YouTube as well. Subscribe over there. We post every episode on YouTube as well. So thanks again, guys. I want everybody to have a terrific, terrific Wednesday. And LEO.